who gave their partner a second chance after cheating. How did it work out? It was a crisp December morning, just a few days before Christmas in 2011. I remember waking up with a dull, throbbing headache, the kind that only comes after a night of too many drinks and not enough sleep. My mouth felt like I'd swallowed a bucket of sand, and the taste of stale beer clung to my tongue. The plan for the day was Christmas shopping with my girlfriend, a chore I detested but knew I couldn't escape. She loved the holidays, and as much as I tried to share her enthusiasm, the idea of battling the crowds in some over-decorated mall made me cringe. I had been out with the guys the night before, an impromptu gathering that started with a couple of beers and somehow spiraled into a full-on drinking session. It had been one of those nights where you lose track of time, and before you know it, you're stumbling home in the early hours of the morning, cursing yourself for agreeing to plans the next day. As I groggily reached for my phone, I realized it was dead. I must have forgotten to plug it in when I got home. Classic. Without much thought, I grabbed my girlfriend's phone from the nightstand to check the time. It was 9:53 a.m., way later than I'd planned to wake up. I was supposed to be up hours ago, getting ready for a day of festive consumerism. But something else caught my eye. A notification that caused my groggy brain to suddenly kick into overdrive. 12 unread messages from Zach. Now, Zach wasn't just some random guy. He was a co-worker of hers, someone she'd mentioned in passing a few times. Harmless enough, or so I thought. But seeing those unread messages from him, my curiosity got the better of. I knew I shouldn't. But in that moment, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that something wasn't right. I hesitated for a second, my thumb hovering over the screen. She was still asleep next to me, her breathing steady and peaceful. I told myself it was just a quick check, just to see if it was something work-related. After all, what could possibly be wrong with a little peek? I tapped on the messages, and the world as I knew it came crashing down around. What I saw on that screen felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just messages. There were pictures, videos, and words that I couldn't unsee or unread. It started with the usual flirty banter, something that might have seemed innocent on the surface, but quickly escalated into something much darker and more intimate. There were declarations of love, of desires that had been acted upon. There were photos of them together, smiling, laughing, as if they were the ones in a relationship, and not me. The videos, those were the worst. Videos of her alone, doing things that I thought were reserved for our private moments, but she was sending them to him. And then there was the talk of drugs. Casual mentions of getting high together, of nights that started with a line and ended in bed. It was a side of her I'd never seen, a side I didn't even know existed. My mind was racing, trying to piece together everything I was seeing. How long had this been going on? How could I have missed the signs? I felt sick to my stomach, a mix of anger, betrayal, and pure heartbreak swirling in my chest. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen, unable to process it. The girl I loved, the one I thought I knew better than anyone, had been lying to me, deceiving me in ways I never imagined. And it wasn't just the cheating. It was the whole package, the drugs, the lies, the secret life she'd been leading without me. I looked over at her, still asleep, completely oblivious to the fact that her world was about to change. And mine, too. Everything was different now. The girl I'd planned a future, the one I'd imagined spending the rest of my life, had just become a stranger to me in the span of a few minutes. I wanted to scream, to shake her awake and demand answers. But instead, I sat paralyzed by the weight of what I'd just discovered. My mind was a blur, a mess of emotions that I couldn't even begin to untangle. What was I supposed to do? How do you even begin to confront something like this? In that moment, I realized there was no going back. Whatever happened next, there was no way to unsee what I'd seen, no way to pretend that everything was okay. The trust, the love, the future we talked about, it all felt like a cruel joke. I put her phone down, careful not to wake her, and got up from the bed. I needed air, needed to think. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking as I grabbed my jacket and quietly slipped out of the apartment. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Not right now. As I stepped out into the cold morning air, the reality of the situation started to sink in. My life, my relationship, everything I thought I knew. It was all shattered in an instant, and there was no way to fix it. I don't know how long I walked that morning. The cold air helped clear my head. The pain in my chest only grew sharper with each passing minute. I wandered aimlessly through the quiet streets, my mind replaying those messages over and over again, each time making the wound deep. I kept thinking about all the moments we'd shared, all the times I'd trusted her, only to realize that it had all been a lie. The anger was there, simmering just beneath the surface, but somehow it felt like it was taking a back seat to the overwhelming sense of betrayal. By the time I got back to the apartment, the sun was higher in the sky, and the streets were beginning to fill with people going about their day. I stood outside the door for a few minutes, trying to figure out what I was going to say, how I was going to handle this. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was no perfect way to confront her. No matter what, the truth was out there now, and nothing I said or did was going to change that. When I finally stepped inside, she was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with her phone in hand. She looked up at me, and for a moment, I thought she might have guessed what was coming. Then she smiled. That familiar smile that once made my heart skip a beat, and I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. This was the woman I'd love, the one I thought I'd spend my life, and in a few short moments, everything between us was about to change. "I went for a walk," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Needed some fresh air." She nodded, still smiling. "Good idea, clears the head." I didn't sit down. I just stood there, looking at her, trying to find the right words. But the more I tried to figure out how to start, the more I realized there was no easy way to say what I needed to say. So I just went. "I saw the messages," I said, my voice calm, almost detached. "The ones from Zach." Her smile faded instantly. I could see the color drain from her face, and she looked down at her phone, almost as if hoping that somehow this wasn't real, that it was just a bad dream she could wake up. But it wasn't a dream. It was very real, and we both knew it. She didn't say anything at first, just sat there, her hands trembling slightly. I expected her to deny it, to try and explain it away, but she didn't. Instead, she let out a long, shaky breath and looked up at me with a mixture of fear and resignation. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want you to find out like this." That was it. No denial, no excuses, just a simple admission of guilt. Somehow, that made it even worse. "Tell me everything," I said, still in that eerily calm voice. "I want to know how long this has been going on." She nodded, and for the next few minutes she told me everything. "It started innocently enough," she said. "Zach was just a co-worker, someone she got along with, nothing more. But then there was a party, and one thing led to another. And before she knew it, they were sleeping together. It wasn't just a one-time thing either. It became a regular occurrence, something they both knew was wrong, but couldn't seem to stop. And then there were the drugs. Zach introduced her to cocaine, and she got hooked. It was a way to escape, she said, to numb the guilt and the stress. She started using more and more, and before she knew it, she was doing lines regularly, sometimes even at work. As she told me this, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small bag of white powder. Without even a hint of hesitation, she poured a line on the table and snorted it right in front of me, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. I just stood watching, feeling completely numb. The woman I loved, the one I thought I knew so well, was a stranger to me. This wasn't the person I'd fallen in love with, the one I'd shared my life with for so long. This was someone else entirely, someone who had been living a double life right under my nose. "I'm so sorry," she repeated, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I never wanted to hurt you." Despite everything, there was a part of me that wanted to believe her, that wanted to forgive her, and somehow make this all go away. But I knew that wasn't possible. The trust was gone, shattered into a million pieces, and no amount of apologies or explanations could ever put it back together. Still, I didn't yell, didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I just looked at her, feeling an overwhelming sense of sadness, and said, "I need some time to think." We got through Christmas. It was awkward, strained, but we both tried to pretend that things were okay, that we could somehow move past this. But the truth was, the relationship was dead, and we were just going through the motions. I could see the guilt in her eyes every time she looked at me, and it only made things worse. There was no joy, no happiness, just a constant reminder of what had been lost. Then came New Year's Eve. We'd gone out to a party with some friends, trying to salvage what was left of our relationship, but it was clear that we were just fooling ourselves. The tension between us was palpable, and I could see the way she was avoiding my eyes, like she was hiding something. Later that night, after we got home, she broke down and admitted the final devastating truth. She'd slept with Zach again the night before, and not just him, his friend too. She'd gone to their place after work, gotten high, and one thing led to another. It wasn't even the first time it had happened. That was it. The last straw. I felt something inside me snap, and I knew I couldn't do this anymore. There was no saving us, no fixing what had been broken. I looked at her, my heart heavy with sadness and anger, and said the words I never thought I'd have to say. "It's over." She didn't argue, didn't beg for another chance. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face, and quietly packed a bag. I watched her leave, feeling a strange mix of relief and sorrow. This was the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, and now she was just a memory, chapter of my life that had ended in the worst possible way. As the door closed behind her, I sank down onto the couch, staring at the empty space where she'd just been. The apartment felt so quiet, so empty, like all the life had been sucked out of it. I was alone now, and for the first time in years, I had no idea what the future held. All I knew was that I had to start over, to rebuild my life from the ground up. But at that moment, all I could do was sit there, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, and wonder how it all went so wrong. Breaking up with her was like tearing off a bandage. Painful, but necessary. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of emotions. There were moments when the weight of it all felt unbearable, when I questioned everything and wondered if I could ever trust anyone again. But as time passed, the pain began to fade, and I started to see the situation for what it really was. A blessing in disguise. It wasn't easy at first. I spent a lot of time alone, trying to process everything that had happened. There were days when the anger would flare up again, and I'd find myself reliving the betrayal, thinking about all the things I could have done different. But deep down, I knew that dwelling on the past wasn't going to help me move forward. So I made a conscious effort to focus on myself, to rebuild my life and find happiness on my own terms. And that's when I met her, my current partner. It wasn't long after the breakup, maybe 6 months or so, and I was still hesitant about getting back into a relationship. But from the moment we met, something just clicked. She was everything my ex wasn't. Kind, understanding, and completely honest. And let's not forget, absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. I won't lie, at first I was cautious, afraid of letting myself fall too quickly, but she had a way of making me feel safe, of reassuring me that not everyone was like my ex. She didn't just talk about honesty and trust, she lived it. There were no secrets, no lies, just a genuine connection that grew stronger every day. As the months turned into years, I realized just how lucky I was to have found someone like her. She supported me through the rough patches, helped me let go of the past, and showed me that it was okay to love and be loved again. With everything just felt right. I didn't have to question her loyalty or wonder what she was doing when I wasn't around. There was a sense of peace in our relationship that I'd never experienced before. Looking back now, it's hard to believe how far I've come. My life has changed in ways I never thought possible. I'm happier than I've ever been. And a lot of that is because of her. She's a million times better than my ex, in every way imaginable. She's the kind of person who makes you want to be better, who lifts you up instead of dragging you down. And I'm grateful every day that I found her. As for my ex, well, her story didn't end so well. At least, not at first. After we broke up, she stayed with Zach for a while. I heard through the grapevine that things weren't going great between them, but honestly, I didn't care much. I was too busy focusing on my own life to worry about hers. But then, about 6 months after we split, I got word that Zach had dumped her. Apparently she'd been cheating on again. This time, it was with his brother. The irony wasn't lost on me, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of karmic justice. She'd made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. Her life took a pretty dark turn after that. She fell deeper into her drug addiction, and it wasn't long before I started seeing her around town. Mostly in pawn shops. I'd be there to sell off some old junk, and she'd be there trying to scrape together enough cash for her next fix. It was sad, really, to see someone who once had so much potential fall so far. But as much as I pitied her, I couldn't stand to be around her. Every time I saw her, it brought back all those old feelings of anger and betrayal. I knew she was struggling, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry. She'd made her choices, and now she was dealing with the consequences. The last I heard, she managed to get clean. Apparently she's turned her life around, found herself a steady job, and even started a family. Good for her, I guess. But honestly, I don't care. I've moved on, and I have no interest in revisiting that chapter of my life. She's just a part of my past, a reminder of a time when I wasn't happy, and I have no desire to let her back into my life, even from a distance.